Thank you, Rick, and thank you also to Kristen and to Steve Cuthbert, and also to Scott Baird, who did a lot of the logistics work on this conference. I really appreciate their help and support. And obviously, I'm grateful to Governor Herbert for throwing this shindig. I'm happy to be here with you today, and we're going to talk about how to capture the impact of what you do every day. You as an individual employee of the state of Utah, and also you as an agency or department or program. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But first, I want to take a quick step back, and I want to get a little personal. And I want you to think about what it is that brought you to the public service. What made you decide to work for government and not for a private agency? What made you decide to work for the state of Utah and not for some other big corporation? What brought you here? Do you remember that moment? A lot of people think about public service from the time they're very, very little, right? I mean, if you remember the Sesame Street People in Your Neighborhood song, right? Most of those folks that they invite on camera with them are public servants. From the time that folks are little, a lot of people want to serve. They want to make a difference in the world. They want to help people. And a lot of the ways that we think about that actually involves public service and sometimes even employment with government organizations or agencies. I don't know if that was you in a picture like this when you were a kid. It was definitely me. And for a lot of us, that passion for public service started really, really early. One of the things that I do with my days is I train public managers. That's what I do. And so I talk to a lot of people about why they come through our program, why it is that they're here, why it is that they want an MPA to learn about public administration instead of an MBA to learn about business administration. And one of the very common threads is that they want to make a difference. They want to make a difference in the world. They want to make a difference in the lives of the people that they serve. And my guess is that for you, this job is a whole lot more than just a paycheck. My guess is that for you, at some point, this job has been about a passion for serving the people of Utah through the work that you and your department and your agency do. So when we imagine public service, it probably looks something like this in our heads, at least at the beginning, right? The idealist in us sees these happy, smiling faces on ourselves and the people that we work with. And of course, the people that we serve are going to be equally happy to be receiving our services. And then at some point, this vision and this idealism gives a little bit of way to something that looks a little more like this, right? On a day-to-day basis, it doesn't actually match the reality. The idealist view of this happy-go-lucky, making an impact everyday world can get a little muddled and hidden in the actual work, the stuff that you have to do every day. Sometimes there's politics involved. Sometimes there's red tape that you're dealing with. When we're working with the public, we need to protect that public interest. And one of the ways that we protect that public interest is through rules and regulations. Well, rules and regulations can be a little buzzkill when this is what you're expecting and you get this, right? So this raises a question. It raises a personal question, but this personal question extends all the way through our programs and our departments and our agency, and that is, how can we capture and communicate the actual impact, that idealistic vision, that view of the way that we're serving the world? How can we capture that impact and communicate it to the people that matter to us? That includes the citizens, that includes the legislature, that includes your boss, it includes yourself, maybe your spouse and family, I don't know. But it includes all the people who care about or could potentially care about that impact that you always dreamed of making. So this is about you. It's about you as an individual. It's about your job and what you're doing with it, what you're accomplishing, the difference that you are making. But it is also bigger than you, because if we collect all of that impact, ideally, we are making a difference. Ideally, we are making the lives of Utahns better. So today we're going to talk about 3 specific things that you can do either at the individual, program, department, or agency level in order to recognize the impact that you are making on a day-to-day basis based on the activities that you actually do, and communicate that impact to other people. So we're going to talk about 3 principles. The first one is having a meaningful mission and being able to identify what the purpose is for which you are working. The second is having a purposeful plan that actually connects in a very logical, clear, and explicit way the day-to-day activities that you are carrying out and the impact that you're ultimately trying to make or achieving that mission. And the third thing is, of course, where the bulk of my work and passion lies, and that is doing empowering evaluation. This is where we actually measure and communicate the impact that we're making based on the plan, based on the objectives that derive from our mission, and allows us to use data and even analysis to communicate that impact to other people. So let's talk about these each in turn. First, a meaningful mission. The question that we're really asking here is, what is our purpose? What are we doing here? So I don't know how true this story is, but frankly, it's a little irrelevant because it's a beautiful illustration of having a meaningful mission. And the story goes that President John F. Kennedy was visiting the Space Center and trying to check out NASA's different operations and looking at the Space Center and seeing how it actually functioned. And of course, at this time, the big goal of the United States was to put a human being on the moon. That was the targeted purpose. So, you know, he's making this visit, and because he's the president and for security reasons, he's making this visit rather late at night when there are not a whole lot of personnel around. Well, it happens that the president comes upon a janitor, and the story goes that this janitor is feverishly mopping the floors, right? And just so diligently working. It's not clear if he was working that hard because he knew the president was watching, but we'll just set that aside for a moment. President Kennedy, in the story, asks, "What are you doing?" And the reply, "I'm helping to put a man on the moon." That's what a meaningful mission does. It connects every single activity of an organization or agency to the purpose and mission of the organization. Now, how does mopping the floor at the Space Center help put a man on the moon? I can think of a half dozen ways that is absolutely true, and that a janitorial staff could be proud of the work that they do to keep things clean so that their personnel are healthy, so that the astronauts are healthy, so that the machinery works properly. I can think of many ways that connecting that activity that may seem unrelated to someone who gets lost in the day-to-day task of filling and refilling that water bucket actually leads to the overall very inspirational, very aspirational mission of putting a man on the moon. So a meaningful mission has the following characteristics. First, it must identify your core purpose. It really has to describe what you're doing. And this purpose should be so core that you should be able to take any activity, and if it doesn't link back to that mission, you should be ready to get rid of that activity. That's how core the mission should be of your organization. Second, I believe that it should be both aspirational and inspirational. If it doesn't motivate people, if it doesn't tap into that belief that we are making a positive impact, it's not going to motivate any action. And it's not going to be supported by the necessary stakeholders. So the second aspect of a meaningful mission is that it is both aspirational and inspirational. The third is that it should be succinct. Now, many mission statements are a lot longer than the 20 words that I'm proposing here. My guess is, because I've looked at a lot of them, that your agency's mission statement is a whole lot more than 20 words. That said, you can have a mission statement inside of which you have a very clear and succinct mission within a mission, that core purpose, a statement that clearly identifies what you exist to do. And finally, this mission statement should guide action. It should motivate people to make specific decisions and take specific actions in order to achieve that mission. So here are some examples of exemplary mission statements. I have pulled most of these from the nonprofit world because the nonprofit world actually does a pretty darn good job of this. So you can see some examples here. USO lifts the spirits of America's troops and their families. If something that USO does not achieve this mission, it is the wrong activity for that organization. It is aspirational, it's inspirational, it's succinct, it's clear, it's a core purpose, and it motivates action. Humane Society celebrates animals and confronts cruelty. The Wounded Warrior Project honors and empowers wounded warriors. Oxfam International creates lasting solutions to poverty, hunger, and social injustice. If Oxfam International is approached with a worthy cause that does not address poverty, hunger, or social injustice, they don't take it on, because that's what a mission does. It clarifies and refines your purpose. There are several other examples here, and you do have these slides on your thumb drive. So by all means, use these as examples of ways to create a meaningful mission. But right now, I'm hoping that you've already started to think about the work that you do and possibly a program with which you're affiliated or an agency or organization. And I want you to take a minute. I'm going to shush. And I want you to take a minute and I want you to think about what it is you do. And I want you to write a short, clear, succinct mission statement. I want to emphasize that this can be done at a variety of levels. You can write a mission statement for you and your position and the job that you have at the state of Utah. And you can write a clear and succinct description of what it is that you do. You can also write this for a program. What does this program do? An agency or department. So I want you to take a second and make sure that it identifies your core purpose, is aspirational, is succinct, and guides action. I'm going to know you're done, because when you're done, what I'd like you to do is share your mission statement with the person next to you. This is a little professor trick to make sure that you're actually doing the activity that I assigned. So go ahead and take a minute and work on those. Fantastic. That noise is a good sign. Now, one question I have for you to think about. And you'll have a chance to talk more about your missions after the session. Remember, we've got lunch after this, which will be a great time to talk about this and refine things. Clearly, these are going to be a work in progress. But I want you to think about how easy it was to draw that mission statement from any organizational materials that you already are aware of in your organization. That's going to give you an idea of how useful this technique may or may not be to take back to your organization. If you were able to say, I'm already motivated by the mission of my agency or organization or program, or I already have a personal mission statement for the job that I do for the state of Utah, fantastic. We're ready for the next step. If not, if this was new for you, that means that either the mission statement that your organization has is not as effective as it could be, or maybe there isn't one. In either case, this is a clear starting point for any discussion of impact. With a meaningful mission statement, with a meaningful mission, we can remind ourselves about why we're here. It's going to be awfully hard to sell and communicate impact to other people if we've forgotten why we're here and what it is that we do. So the first thing that it does is help you to motivate yourself in your own action. It can help us as individuals to feel greater fulfillment. And if you're a manager, it can help the people who work for you to feel greater fulfillment, which is going to help them to be more motivated to do a better job at the things that they do on a day-to-day basis. Third, this can help us to articulate our purpose clearly, quickly, and succinctly to all of our many stakeholders. Right? It clearly communicates to the citizens what we're doing for them or on their behalf, clearly communicates the same to the legislature or again to your boss or higher ups in the state. This is an important piece of being able to communicate your impact, is being able to say and clearly communicate what impact it is that you aspire to achieve. That is the first step. The other thing that we can do with this is start to make strategic decisions. When we are evaluating what activities stay and what activities go, at whatever level we're talking about, the mission should be central to that decision process. Is this within the scope of our purpose? Yes or no? If the answer is no, then strategy suggests this may not be an appropriate activity for your organization. Either that or you have misstated or misrepresented the mission for which you actually exist. So this can be a very clear assistant in strategic alignment. The next step is to come up with a purposeful plan. The question that we're asking when we talk about a purposeful plan is, how do our activities achieve our objectives? Objectives are going to be sort of submissions that derive from our core purpose, and they're going to be the more immediate goals that we have set, the targets that we have set, again, either as individuals or as agencies, in order to be able to make a difference. So for this, I like the metaphor of a puzzle. Again, we're gonna go back to childhood for a minute. I loved puzzles when I was a kid. Absolutely could not get enough of them. But one of the things that I noticed was that if I put the picture of the puzzle from the box up while I was working on the puzzle, it was a whole lot easier for me to be able to figure out where each individual piece belonged. If I looked at each individual piece by itself, sometimes it wasn't even clear what that whole picture was supposed to be. So having that full picture of the puzzle was an important motivating factor for me to be able to put the puzzle together and motivate taking the individual piece and spending the time on that individual piece to put it into place. Well, I think the day-to-day activities that we do for the state of Utah is a lot like a puzzle piece, right? We can get lost in the day-to-day. Sometimes the full picture isn't as clear. That full picture should resemble the mission that we just talked about. But what we want to do now is we want to link the individual activities that we're carrying out with the overall mission of the agency, department, organization, or even the state. So a purposeful plan has the following characteristics. First, it identifies the actual day-to-day activities that you carry out. There's no point in having a purposeful plan about stuff you don't actually do, right? So we want to talk about what it is that you actually do on a day-to-day basis. What is it that your program or department or agency does operationally, rather than thinking just in terms of the mission. Second, a purposeful plan will identify the resources that you need in order to successfully carry out those activities. Now, this is essential, especially in a public setting, where resources are something that are rare to begin with, and something that we regularly have to justify and sometimes even fight for. We need to have clear links between how the resources that we want and need impact the activities that we do on a day-to-day basis. All right. Third, it links your daily activities to your mission through a series of outcomes. So we're not going to get immediately from the day-to-day activity like mopping the floor all the way up to putting a man on the moon. Mopping the floor is necessary but not sufficient for putting a man on the moon. So what we need is a map of how we get from this particular activity through all the intermediate steps that we have to have in order to help achieve that final mission. When I was talking earlier, I gave some examples of these outcomes that are intermediate. One intermediate outcome for the mopping of the floor at the Space Center might be healthier employees. Another might be better functioning technology or machinery. These are the intermediate steps that we are assuming link the activities that we're doing on a day-to-day basis all the way up through a logical chain up to the mission of the organization. So a good purposeful plan needs to do that. It needs to link activities to outcomes through an outcome chain. And finally, a good purposeful plan will logically map all of these elements together. Which activities are important for which outcomes, which resources are necessary for those activities, and which ones map most strongly to the ultimate outcomes. So that's going to look something like this. We're going to start with your activities and your mission. Those should be the two most visible pieces of what it is that you're doing. So you start with activities and mission, and you believe that there's some sort of link between them. The secret that I'm going to let out of the bag right now is that this is called a logic model. For any of you who have had experience with program evaluation, this is a very formal piece of developing a program evaluation plan. And in a program evaluation plan, typically we don't talk about the mission at the end, we talk about long-term outcomes. So I'm going to replace that here so that we're consistent with the language of program evaluation. So we're linking our activities to our outcomes, ultimately. The next most visible piece of this purposeful plan is the inputs. I think it's very easy to link the activities that we do on a day-to-day basis with the stuff we need to have in place in order to carry out those activities. We start to identify what is essential and what isn't essential for carrying out our day-to-day activities, again with the assumption that the activities we're doing ultimately lead to the long-term outcomes or mission that we're trying to achieve. The next most visible piece is the immediate result of what we have just accomplished when we do an activity. That immediate result doesn't always by itself fulfill the mission. In fact, that's rare. So what we want to do is start thinking about, if I do this activity, then what? What happens as a result? And that's going to be that first layer, that immediate result, that's going to be your list of short-term outcomes. A purposeful plan has short-term outcomes as the immediate results of activities. Then you're going to have a whole series of intermediate outcomes that is basically all the rest of the logical steps and assumptions that have to happen between what happens as an immediate result of the activity that you've done and the long-term mission that you're trying to achieve. So we're going to go back to our janitor. We're going to start with the activity of mopping, and we want to end with putting a man on the moon. I'm going to work backwards to what's necessary as inputs to carry out the activity of mopping. So obviously, I haven't gone in depth with this particular logic model, but we can sort of intuitively think about things like clean water, bucket, mop, and time without other workers tromping all over the work you just did, right? So then what is the immediate result of mopping that floor? It isn't putting a man on the moon. The immediate result is clean floors. What happens as a result of clean floors? Well, we would expect less debris in the machinery, healthier mechanics and astronauts, and ultimately, if we continue to link all of these different intermediate outcomes together, ultimately, we would expect to see fewer delays and malfunctions. We start to see higher level outcomes that come as a result of this. And it's those higher level outcomes that actually help us to achieve putting a man on the moon. Another example that's maybe a little closer to home, and I am by no means an expert in this particular field, but I think it illustrates something that is maybe a little bit more relevant. Let's say that our ultimate objective is to improve child welfare outcomes. Well, what are the day-to-day activities that you carry out? Obviously, there's more than just one. These logic models involve a lot more than a single activity and a lot more than a single intermediate outcome. So ultimately, when you draw these things, you're going to have more pieces to them and a lot of sort of arrows pointing from one thing to the next. But we're going to simplify this for today. And we're going to say that the specific activity that we're focused on is making home visits. So we've got caseworkers who are going to make home visits with the intent of ultimately achieving improved child welfare outcomes. So we're making home visits. What do we need to have in place in order to make those home visits? Well, a few things we need are experienced social workers, cars, maybe some tablets so that we can take our case notes in the field. Obviously, there may be other things as well, money for salaries, et cetera, right? So there are a variety of inputs that we would need in order to make those home visits. What is the immediate result of a home visit? Just by visiting a child's home does not guarantee that we're going to improve child welfare outcomes. We are making a whole lot of assumptions in between that home visit and improved child welfare outcomes that creates this purposeful plan or logic model. So one short-term outcome might be detailed, multidimensional information about the child's home environment. I can get that as an immediate result of visiting that child's home. I make a child home visit, I get this detailed information. What happens next? All the stuff that happens next is that outcome chain that helps me link the activities to the long-term outcomes. Here I have some examples like better information about family needs, more trust between families and social workers, and ultimately better care decisions. If we can achieve better care decisions, we may actually have a shot at improving child welfare outcomes. Having a purposeful plan allows us to look at the logic of the activities that we are doing on a daily basis and see how they connect to that larger mission. So I want you to take a moment and I want you to very briefly, and of course this is something that usually takes a lot of time to develop a really good logic model, but I want you to take a moment and think through, first take that mission that you started with from activity 1, and I want you to identify just one specific activity that you do to help achieve that mission. I want you to work backwards and identify a few inputs that are necessary to do that specific activity. And I want you to work forward to what is the immediate result of carrying out that activity. Then, as time permits, you're going to fill in some of the other steps that have to happen in between the immediate outcome and the long-term outcome. Again, I'll know that you are ready when you are sharing what you've done with your neighbor. So I'll give you a few minutes to work on that. All right, go ahead and wrap up your sharing. Building a purposeful plan and creating this kind of logic model is an important step in being able to see your impact and communicate it to other stakeholders. One of the things that the success model does is it helps to motivate us to gather data about the work that we do so that we can better communicate our impact. But before you ever collect any data, one of the things that you need to have in place is this kind of logic model. If you have this in place, even before you've gathered data, you can communicate information about what you do and how it is expected to achieve your mission before you have data. This will help you to communicate, first of all, to see your impact, see the logical steps that have to happen in order to achieve that impact, and help you see where some of the data is that you may want to be collecting. But the logic model itself will allow you to more clearly link the things that you do to the resources that you have requested and how those activities and resources are expected to ultimately lead to accomplishment or achievement of your mission. And again, that mission is one that is aspirational and motivational and inspirational and one that people want to support. So this is a crucial first step in being able to start thinking about things in terms of a more data or evaluation-oriented approach. With a purposeful plan, we can clearly communicate the resources we need and justify them. We can identify the specific purposes of each activity, where that puzzle piece fits in the larger picture of our department or agency or the state of Utah. We can see where our activities fit within our desire to achieve a mission. We can also identify what the intermediate steps are that we're expecting to happen between the stuff that we do and the outcomes that we have. Logic models can actually help you troubleshoot your own thinking and your own processes, because you can look at it logically and try to identify how reasonable is it that we can jump from this activity to this outcome, and from that outcome to the next one, and from that one to the next time, and ultimately to the mission. Sometimes we're making assumptions that are unreasonable. Focusing on a logic model helps us to refine and make more purposeful the plan for how our activities are going to achieve our mission. And we can actually troubleshoot and identify better activities that are more likely to achieve our mission faster, more efficiently, more effectively, etc. Next, we can link every activity to that larger mission, which allows us to better justify each activity and the resources for them. The other thing we can do is waste fewer resources on activities that aren't going to ultimately achieve the mission. And we can clearly identify which resources are necessary and which ones might be things that aren't actually serving our ultimate purposes. Running an organization that has a purposeful plan or a logic model in place is going to be clearer and easier and help the people who work for that department or agency to see the big picture and understand where they fit in and where the specific activities that they're carrying out fit into that broader mission. Finally, we're going to talk about empowering evaluation. The question here is, does the plan work? So I'm going to show you some pictures now. And I'm going to talk you through what the topics are and what the pictures say. But that's really not the point. What I want you to think about is what it would be like if you had this kind of visual representation of data that you could communicate to people when you talk about the impact that you are making, okay? I'm going to show you a variety of pictures that are derived from different kinds of techniques of gathering and analyzing data, but all of them have some pretty common characteristics, and it's those common characteristics that we're going to talk about in a few minutes in terms of what qualifies as an empowering evaluation. So this is a pair of graphs about high-risk Head Start kids. And some of these kids are participating in an additional program called the Incredible Years program. Okay? So the green bars in each of these graphs shows the control group. So these are Head Start kids, high-risk kids, who've already been screened for being high risk, but they're not participating in the Incredible Years program. The blue bars show the kids who were randomly selected to participate in the Incredible Years group, okay? So we're comparing likes with likes here and looking just at the impact of participating in the additional program that is Incredible Years. What would it be like for you to be able to show these kinds of differences in, this is negative behaviors at school. You'll see that the high-risk kids who weren't participating in Incredible Years are this little tiny blue blip here, and this is our control group. This is the group of kids who were not involved with Incredible Years. Here we have some more positive outcomes. So this is the teachers saying that these kids have social competence. So we have different outcomes that we're looking at here. But again, the positive outcomes for the Incredible Years group, much higher. Easy to see that they have much higher outcomes than these like high-risk Head Start peers. This last one is home observations of behavior. So now we have not only negative behaviors at school and teacher reports, but now we've got behaviors at home. And here we see that even at home, the kids that are participating in Incredible Years are doing better than their Head Start peers. Head Start and Incredible Years are not the point here. The point here is the story and the power and the impact that this tells. If you are trying to achieve a mission and you can show data like this that says this is the impact that we're making, that will motivate you, it'll motivate the people you work for, and it will motivate the stakeholders of your organization. This will help you to resource the stuff that works. So this is where we're headed, is this kind of evaluation. All right, here's another one. This is actually an international study, and we're looking at the impact of preschool. And so we're actually looking at the impact on math performance specifically, and we're looking at kids who have attended preschool. These green bars account for socioeconomic status. So we're taking out any variation that might be a result of differences in family background or family resources. And the height of each of these bars is the math score point difference between kids who attended preschool and kids who didn't attend preschool. This bar here in the middle is the average. Based on this international impact study of the difference in math scores between kids who went to preschool and kids who didn't have preschool, what kind of a story does this tell? These down here, there are a few countries where there was no real difference that was seen, or there might have even been a negative difference observed. But all of these other ones, those are positive differences in math scores. Again, the point isn't about preschool. The point here is about the story that you can tell with good evaluation, with empowering evaluation. What would it be like to have a picture like this of the program that you run or work for, to be able to tell people what you do and the impact that you make? This will motivate your employees to work harder, to be proud of the work that they do, to try to refine the work that they do to make these bars even higher. And when you go to seek resources and you show them a logic model that says, here's how the resources lead to the activity, whatever it is, whether it's preschool or something else. And here's what we're trying to ultimately achieve. Here, we're looking at math performance. We can demonstrate an impact here. What kind of a story does that tell? How powerful is that? Here's another one. So this is a study that was done in Kenya, and this is on national school graduation rates. And there were different qualities before this study. There are different qualities of secondary schools that students can attend. And they take a standardized test to determine which quality of school they're going to attend. So this is called a regression discontinuity design, which of course makes me very excited and probably makes you less excited. But what they've done here is they've said, okay, we're going to look at the population of students who scored barely above the eligibility cutoff to go to a good school, and the ones who scored barely below the eligibility cutoff that made them need to go to one of the lesser quality schools. Now, all of these folks in this range are going to be so close in test scores that really, on a good day or a bad day, they might have been in the opposite group, right? Because we're only going to look at the folks who are right there, right at the cutoff that determines which kind of school they go to. Then what we're going to do is we're going to look at the probability of their graduating from national high school. We're going to look at graduation rates and see what the impact of that secondary school education was on these students. Look at this story. For people who scored barely below the cutoff, who are essentially the same as their above the cutoff peers, had much lower graduation rates than did the people in better secondary schools. Again, high school graduation rates and secondary schools in Kenya is not our purpose here. The purpose is to motivate the power of evaluation in being able to tell the story of your impact, both to yourself and to your stakeholders and your employees. I think this is the last one. We're going to look at, this is in the state of Illinois, and this is the Medicaid client infant mortality trend. And what we're comparing is the infant mortality for folks who have Medicaid only with those who have WIC and or other supplementary programs on top of just Medicaid. This blue line is the line that shows infant mortality rates, which are bad, among just Medicaid users. This shows the impact of the WIC and FCM programs. That's the kind of story that you want to be able to tell. This, again, is a different kind of evaluation. It's a different kind of analysis. It's a different kind of data. Here, we're just tracking infant mortality over years, and we have two comparable groups. What I'm trying to do here is motivate the power of being able to use an evaluation. And one of the things that, there are several things that all of these evaluations have in common. And so these are the characteristics that I would include within that sort of category or class of empowering evaluations. The first is that they measure program outcomes. It is insufficient to measure program activities. It does me no good to count how many home visits you did if I don't know what impact they had. So an empowering evaluation must evaluate and measure outcomes. Now, ideally, you're going to measure your long-term outcome, right? That's kind of what we're all trying to achieve. But really, a good evaluation doesn't have to go that far. If you've done step 2 and you have a purposeful plan and you know what all the different outcomes are that have to happen before you achieve your mission, you can actually look at each of those outcomes and evaluate whether or not you're hitting those intermediate targets. Sometimes that means that you can get data sooner than you thought you could and less expensively than you thought you could, because it is an appropriate thing to do in evaluation to look at any of those intermediate outcomes. Now, they're not going to automatically mean that you've achieved your mission, but they will help you to tell a powerful story. So the first thing that an empowering evaluation does is it measures outcomes. Second, one of the things that all of these pictures that I showed have in common is that they compare program outcomes with what would have happened if the program didn't exist. you're basically creating some kind of alternate reality that you can communicate along with the reality that exists in your program. So every one of the examples that I gave provided some kind of comparison. It's either comparing similar students with students who got the program versus students who didn't get the program, or we're comparing across similar countries, or we're comparing pre and post tests. We're comparing ultimate outcomes from Medicaid with other program outcomes. Basically, we are creating two parallel universes and gathering data on both. And that's going to show a much stronger impact than just saying, hey, 95% of our clients really like what we do. All right. On this one, which I actually view as a more challenging activity, there was a lot of talking sooner than maybe expected. And so I'm curious, how many of you are primarily talking about the challenges with identifying and gathering data? Okay. This is part of the crux of it, right? These are not necessarily obvious or easy things that we're talking about, but they are things that are doable, and they are doable for every single agency and every single program. The problem is that sometimes figuring out what's going to work, what's reasonable, what's affordable, what we have the time for, both on our political horizon and in practical terms, sometimes that can be difficult, but it can be done. And starting to think about evaluation and starting to look at data and gathering data on outcomes is always going to be better than not, right? So starting the program, the process, and then refining it over time. You don't have to build the perfect program evaluation the first time around. Most of the time, that's not how it works, even if you hire a consultant, right? Hopefully, if you've paid good money for it, you're doing a little better than you would otherwise, but it doesn't have to be perfect the first time you run it. It's going to give you information. Sometimes the information you're going to get is about the quality of the data itself and whether or not your evaluation is going to work. And then you can start to troubleshoot that. So it's okay that there are data challenges. If you're running into data challenges, it probably means that you're thinking about it pretty carefully. What I want you to avoid is believing that it's not possible, because it is possible. It is possible to perform empowering evaluation for every agency, every department, every activity. Some of those will be stronger evaluations than others, but it is possible to do this kind of evaluation with every organization. With an empowering evaluation, you can directly see the impact that you are making, the impact that your activities are having, and you can look directly at the outcomes and what you're achieving. You can identify what works and what doesn't. That's important, because we don't want to be spending your time and the taxpayers' money on stuff that doesn't actually achieve our outcomes. We want to be innovative. We want to be motivated to innovate, and we want to do stuff that works. If you have empowering evaluation, you can communicate the impact that you're making to stakeholders, including funders and supervisors, and to your employees. And finally, you can identify best practices that can even be exported to other agencies or other states or even federal government. You can find things that work so well that you have to share them, and you can become a leader in the activities and the achievement of outcomes that you have endeavored to undertake. So, communicating impact begins with being able to see the impact that you're making. There are 3 components that will get you started on this road. Even refining your mission is going to better help you to identify and communicate the impact that you're making. Simply refining your mission is a clear first step in being able to identify and communicate what it is that you do, what it is that you achieve by carrying out the activities that you do on a day-to-day basis. Even better than that is creating a purposeful plan. If you have a purposeful plan in a logic model format, you can communicate not only what you're trying to achieve, but how it is that you expect that what you are doing is going to ultimately lead to that outcome, and how the resources that you're asking for or using help you to achieve those activities that lead to those longer-term outcomes. And finally, getting to that point of having an empowering evaluation in place can demonstrate effectiveness by showing whether or not you're accomplishing that mission or some of those intermediate or short-term outcomes, inspire innovative change, and ultimately reduce practices that don't work. So here at the end of the presentation, I'm going to wear 2 hats for a second. The first hat that I'm going to wear is one that I put on with the state of Utah, and that is that empowering evaluation is part of the success model. And this is something that we want to help empower agencies and departments and programs to implement. And so resources have been made available, including trainings, so that we can come in and help you walk through this process and develop an evaluation that is practical and reasonable and something where you actually can collect and analyze the data with resources that are on hand. So I want you to get excited about that idea, that there's support for this from the very top levels in this state. The second hat that I'm going to wear is one as a private BYU professor. I have the same motivation as the state of Utah. I want to make that difference in the world. Remember, I was that little kid who wanted to help serve people. One of the things that BYU provides through the MPA program is an opportunity for public and nonprofit organizations to receive free evaluation consulting through a course that I'm beginning to teach this week. If your organization is interested in having us help you to develop an evaluation plan, you don't necessarily have to wait until you have the resources in-house. You can work with us as a free community partner, and we will develop an evaluation plan with you that is within your budget and the resources that you have on hand, or we'll help you find community resources that you can afford, and we are happy to do that for you. So on your thumb drives that you received today, there is an application for partnership with BYU in order to do that. I am encouraging you, if you are interested in this, to apply and apply quickly, because technically the deadline has passed. But I have saved a few spots specifically for those of you who are interested in this based on the OPS conference. So it's a probably 15-minute application, if that. Go online, fill out the application, and let's talk in the next day or two about whether or not we can take on your program evaluation this semester. I hope that you are excited about re-engaging in the vision that you had when you entered the public service. I hope that you believe that you do make an impact and that you can find that impact, see that impact, and communicate it to other stakeholders. And I hope that these 3 techniques have been useful to you and will continue to be useful to you as you move forward. Thank you so much.